Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, How to Win at Customer Onboarding and Your Career. I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from, so please drop us a comment in the chat. And also please remember to ask all of your questions in the chat too. We'll be answering these throughout the session and also in the Q&A portion at the end. I'd now like to introduce your two incredible speakers for taking the stage. We have Clarke, who is the Chief at GUIDEcx COO, which is the leader in customer onboarding software. Always passionate about customer experience, Harris and his teams have unlocked insights through data that elevate customer onboarding experiences. Their world-class service has earned awards such as the coveted #1 ranking on G2's Relationship Index out of all project management tools. Additionally, in 2022, Harris was awarded the Silicon Slopes Hall of Fame Award for COO of the Year. We also have Rod Cherkas, who is the CEO of Hello CCO and is the leading global consultant and advisor to Chief Customer Officers and their functional team leaders. He has been a post-sale executive of one of Silicon Valley's customer-centric companies, including Intuit, RingCentral, Marketo, and Gainsight. Also the author of the Chief Customer Officer Playbook, 8 strategies that will accelerate your career and win you a seat at the executive table. So with all that said, I'd now like to hand it over to Harris and Rod.
Thanks so much, Beth. Rod, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks for being
with
us.
Great to see you, Harris. Great to see you. Looking forward to it today.
I am thrilled. I've been scanning the chat here as everyone's been coming in. We're talking to people from all over the country and all over the world. So thanks everyone for joining. It means a lot, whether it's late at night or early in the morning or midday for you. We're gonna try to give you a great webinar here. As we've been preparing, we both said over and over again, this is a webinar that we would want to attend. So I hope you get a lot out of it. Rod and I could talk for hours about this. We're both very passionate about it. Please reach out to us outside of this as well with any questions. Keep questions flowing in here as well. And we will try to make sure that we get to everything, whether it's here or later. First, little get to know you. So Rod and I are both going to play a game with you, 2 truths and a lie. You've got all the options up on the screen, but I'll read them. Essentially, you are going to put in the chat either a 1 or a 2 or a 3, okay? And the idea is you're trying to pick out the lie. So the first is that I'm the father of 4 boys. The second is that I walked into the White House with the New York Yankees. And the third is that I went skydiving the day before my wedding. Let's see. And I'm seeing some people on the audio saying no sound. Could anyone maybe throw in the chat if they are able to hear me? You can hear me, Rod? Okay, good. All right, some can hear. So I apologize to those of you who can't. We will, yeah, maybe try to tweak the audio settings there. But it looks a little all over the board for me. The truth is that I am the father of 4 boys. They are amazing, and it's always there's never a dull moment at my house. It's always loud and always fun. And I did walk into the White House with the New York Yankees. I grew up in DC. I saw that we've got someone from DC here, and quick story about that. So we were friends with the head of Secret Service. He was watching me for the day, and I think this should make us feel good about the security at the White House, because he lost track of me while doing his job. So at the end of the day, I told my mom, he's a great guy, but not a great babysitter. And a young boy, I saw the Yankees that walked in, Derek Jeter, and walked over to them. Before I knew it, we were heading up into the White House. But I did not get a chance to go skydiving. My wife told me that my last opportunity was the day before we got married, and sadly I missed out on that.
All right. And then for me, if you want to put in what you think is the lie. So 1 is I'm a best-selling author. 2 is I've performed in a Broadway show. And 3 is I married a child TV actress. What do you think? Yeah, 2 or 3, bunch of 2. So I think there was a little bit of a giveaway about the book, because I recently came out with the Chief Customer Officer Playbook, which is done really well. We'll talk a little bit about how you might benefit from that. And I did marry a child TV actress. So I grew up on the East Coast in Philadelphia, and she grew up in Los Angeles, and over a decade was in commercials and sort of extra parts in some television shows. You can find it on YouTube if you're interested. But anyway, I don't know how sort of an entertainment person ended up with me from the East Coast, but I always felt out of place after college when I would go visit Los Angeles. But she was in some McDonald's commercials and Frosted Flakes, and met Dolly Parton and Lynn Swan. Anyway, it was kind of fun. I do love Broadway shows. In fact, we were watching one on television last night, Come From Away, which is one of my favorites, but have never performed. I'm not a stage performer. We do a lot of singing in our house and like to see touring shows. So anyway, let's get on.
One day you'll be on that Broadway stage. The webinar stage we'll have to do for today, Rod. Okay, so to set the stage a little bit, we want to give you winning strategies for your customer onboarding process. We want to give you some practical things that you can do. Both Rod and I have a lot of experience in this space. We want to share some stories and some insights there, and talk about how that will help drive efficiency. But then also we want to fold this into skills that help you grow your career as a customer success leader, as an onboarding leader, as somebody in the client-facing world. Both Rod and I, as we've been brainstorming topics for this webinar and thinking in general about, what could help and what kind of webinar would we want to sit in on right now. I think with everything going on in the economy and in software, we want to try to bring a little positivity and light to some of the challenges that we face, and highlight how taking the opportunity to learn in a tough market will set you up for great success in your career, and also be the right thing to do for your customers. So, couple of polls really quick. I'm going to launch this. Rod, it looks like you're not the only one who loves Come From Away. Okay, I think everyone should see a poll that just launched. And we'd love to get, answers are flowing in. Thank you. What's your biggest pain point with customer onboarding? Are you seeing missed deadlines where it's hard to meet the expectations that you've set? Are you disorganized? And this is anonymous, so if you're disorganized, feel free to put it. But disorganization may mean you're not using any specific tool. Things are kind of all over the place, the way you do it versus the way somebody else does it on your team. Is customer engagement a problem? Just getting people to engage, which is always the irony in customer onboarding. They just bought this thing. How can it be hard to engage them? Or are you struggling with poor reporting? All right, a ton of answers are flowing in. It does seem like there's a clear front runner here. In fact, half. So we got a good amount of responses in each one. So nobody's alone, which is good news. Missed deadlines has got representation. Disorganization has got representation. Poor reporting has representation. We'll try to touch on all of that a little bit. But the number one thing by 50% of the votes is customer engagement. Rod, does that surprise you, or is that what you would have expected?
It doesn't surprise me. From having run professional services and onboarding teams for most of the last decade, figuring out ways to make the process interesting for your customers, to tie it to showing them how they can do their jobs better. And also, we know that our customers are busy, so we need to be sort of efficient in how we interact. It's just an example that this is, doing customer onboarding with your solution is just one of the many things that they're responsible for. So how do you keep them engaged? We'll talk a little bit about that today.
Absolutely. Okay, next poll, we want to get your thoughts on what's the biggest challenge related to your career growth. So vote for either lack of opportunities in your current position, how to effectively market yourself. Sometimes you feel like, I know what I'm doing, but I got to help make sure that it's clear and comes across the right way. How about building cross-functional relationships, or knowing what skills to learn and develop? Which feels like it's getting in the way for you? Lots of great answers coming in. Again, yeah, good representation across each one. Here, the one that has 40% or just over 40% the votes is knowing what skills to learn and develop. And you all are going to think that we're setting ourselves up here, but that is a lot of what we'll be talking about. Rod, I bet you're not surprised to see that one either.
No, I think this is a really good example of how you can tie the work that you're doing in your day-to-day to broader skills that you're going to need in this role, in your next role, and as you go through your career. And I saw that a lot when I was sort of doing interviews and thinking about writing the book about what are the skills that, you know, post-sale individuals and post-sale leaders need to help grow their careers. So we're definitely going to talk about some of these today.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So we're going to spend the rest of the time talking through these four things, and we're going to talk about it from the perspective of how it's going to help your teams and your customers, and then also how it's going to help you build your career. So we'll be talking about experiencing the process yourself, establishing clear communication channels, tracking progress, identifying risk factors, and measuring results so that we know that we're getting better. And we're also going to be talking about this maturity model here that Rod put together in his playbook.
Yeah, so kind of going back to this point that some of the audience mentioned about the desire to know what skills they need to learn and develop. You know, I've been a post-sale executive for most of my career. I've worked on the front lines. I've been a manager, VP, SVP, a CCO, and a lot of us focus just on, we kind of get asked, what are your goals? Your goals are the metrics. Well, metrics and achieving those outcomes is certainly important, but what I've also found is that there are a set of skills that while you're doing your work, you can be developing, whatever level you're at, whether you're at the front line, a manager, an executive, to help you grow. And I identified throughout my career, and as I work with clients, I do last 2 years, I started a consulting business. So I've worked with dozens of clients and hundreds of folks. And I've identified that there are these 8 skills strategies that commonly come up as the most important ones for individuals to develop who might aspire to be you know, a chief customer officer or a senior customer facing executive someday. And we're going to talk about a couple of these. But I wrote a book about the skills, and it's not just for CCOs. It's for, you know, anyone who might aspire to be customer-facing executive someday, with very practical examples of what you can be doing to develop each of these skills at wherever you are in your career. So, looking forward to discussing with everyone today.
Yeah, thanks, Rod. I just want to highlight, I think that a theme that we hope you take away from today is how to take challenges that you may be having in each one of these. And sometimes those challenges, you know, we can kind of get myopic on those challenges and feel like, you know, it's hard to build these cross-functional relationships, but just how valuable it is to lean into that now more than ever, not only for your customer's sake, but also because these are critical skill sets to have as you continue to progress as a leader when working with customers. So let's set the table a little bit in what the customer onboarding experience is and what it looks like. This, as we're talking about onboarding a customer, we're talking about that, what should be the honeymoon phase, right? After they've come through a successful sales cycle, they've purchased your software or your service, and you're trying to get them up and running. So we're not just talking about the setup or the integration or the, you know, the technical requirements to enable or install users to use your software, but we're talking about really the experience that you offer as you're getting them prepared to get value out of whatever they've purchased from you. And there are 2 things that we need to know and ground ourselves in when we're talking about customer onboarding. And this comes from more a tangential field, well, not even tangential, just a totally separate field of neuroscience here, where, you know, we wonder what happens in the brain when you've purchased something, but you don't have it yet, or what happens in the brain when you're expecting something that hasn't come quite yet. And these 2 parts of the brain really light up. In the amygdala, this creates these, you know, anxiety, worry, fear of the unknown, what's going to happen next. And that's because you have purchased something and you're not using it yet, right? It's not like downloading an app on your phone and you're off and running. So there's this constant churning in the brain of fear, and not fear, but fear of the unknown, right? And then in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, I bet you didn't think you'd hear that word on this webinar today, and I'm proud I got through it, is the value center of your brain, where you're evaluating, hey, am I getting what I paid for here? Is this exactly what I hoped it would be? How does this compare to what my impressions were in the demo, from the marketing material, from others that I talked to who use this? So putting yourself in, and we're going to talk about this in more detail later, but putting yourself in the customer's shoes, or trying to get their mindset, or putting yourself in their brain, is to understand that these things, whether consciously or subconsciously, are constantly firing during that initial onboarding experience. So the question that we need to ask ourselves as onboarding professionals is, when we look at our onboarding journey that we've created for customers, are we providing antidotes to fear and reinforcements of value? And I'd even push you as far as to say, look at every touch point you have with the customer during onboarding and ask, does this touch point either provide an antidote to fear or a reinforcement of value? And if it doesn't, it's got to be reconsidered, or it's got to be restructured to make sure that it does, or maybe even eliminated to try to get closer to that. If you think of, and we'll share some examples of this, but if you think of some consumer examples, like Rod, I don't know if you've ever ordered a pizza from Domino's or been on a flight with Delta, but there are all of these, or even if we think of FedEx or Amazon, these companies go out of their way to tell you what's happening, and they're trying to provide antidotes to fear so you don't wonder what's happening or what's going to happen next, and reinforcing value of, hey, shopping with us helps make sure that you know what's happening. So those are two critical things there.
Yeah, I wanted to add in. So one of my peers, Anita Toth, has helped come up with this sort of an emotional journey that I tend to see a lot in onboarding, which is when you're in the buying phase, you're really excited. And so your energy level is really high. And then as you start working with the onboarding team, you start to see value. But then what happens is your energy level starts to go down, because now you have this fear of what's going to happen and the change, and it's a lot of work and time to get it ready to get that outcome. So going back to the poll results, how do you keep your customers engaged as they go through this natural cycle of excitement and then realizing, like, hey, this is a bunch of work to make it happen? And solutions like GUIDEcx can improve that engagement, tighten that time, so you're not in this period where you're kind of in this emotional lull before you start to see the benefit for your organization. So you can be thinking about how you can shorten or how you can dull this very typical emotional journey.
Yeah, great point. Okay, so one of the big things that we're going to talk about here is experiencing the process yourself. What are things that we do that help make sure that everyone on this call probably knows what the experience is that you offer, but I would venture to say many of us may not know how the experience feels that we offer, right? We may know what it is, but not how it feels. So why, and Rod, let me turn this to you. Why should people do this? Why it's hard. It takes time. Yeah. You got to create a bit of a demo or fake environment to experience this yourself. Why is it worth the trouble to go through the experience of onboarding from a customer's perspective?
Yeah, so I think it's so important to be able to relate to what your customers are going through as they're trying to set up your software or your solution, and not just sort of ask them questions, but try and internalize it. There are two examples I wanted to share. So one, when I worked at Ring Central, with every new cohort of employees, we would go through the process of actually buying one of the phones. This is when you sort of had an office-based phone, and then you set up the SaaS solution with your call routing and your messaging and stuff. But we would actually order a phone online. We would get the box delivered. We would open up the box, and we would see what paperwork and documentation, and then set up the phone. And then we'd go through the process of actually setting up the call routing and setting up the messaging and setting up the forwarding, so that we could see what our customers were going through and where they were struggling. We would call support. We would call the implementation team and set up that appointment. So we would go through that experience. And what this helped us do was internalize what our customers were going through, not just sort of asking them, but feeling it for ourselves, feeling, did the connections work? Was the information consistent? So I think it's a really great example when you can do these things to either go through it yourself, have these chair sides where you're observing and watching your customers do it. And even when I worked at Marketo, we brought in customers to do sort of a challenge to see if they could set up Marketo by themselves. And we watched them do it, right? We would give them our, sort of the getting started guide. We would take them to the website and watch them try and go through it so that we could see and they could talk out loud about what was happening in their experience, what they were thinking, where they were getting stuck, so we could continuously improve. Have you seen this, Eris, when you've been working with your clients?
Yeah, I have. And I got to say, I love the two ways you just gave to approach this. One way is to literally go through it yourself. You talked about ordering a phone yourself online because that's what your company was selling, and then getting it set up in your office and doing that with new cohorts of team members, I think is excellent to get that perspective with fresh eyes. And then another one is sitting kind of chair to chair, either virtually or physically with your customers and watching them go through the experience. But yeah, I just want to say for everyone, there's a reason we put this first. If there's one thing you take away from today, please let it be this. Too often, and Rod mentioned this twice, feeling the experience, like going through so you feel what it's like to set up that part of the software or that integration or that phone. There's a big difference between knowing what you're offering and knowing how it feels. In today's economy, so much is commoditized where there are competitors to you, there are other options. And so having a product that's great and that you're proud of is important, but the experience that you offer can sometimes make all the difference. And especially as we look down the road to the renewal cycle, often people, that first impression, if you've ever heard of confirmation bias, I guess to jump back into the field of neuroscience for a second, confirmation bias can often influence renewals where, hey, the experience we had with this company for the first 30 to 90 days was fantastic. They were there with us. They understood what we were going through versus we were kind of just dropped off and left to our own devices. If you go through the experience yourself, I promise you will find things that surprise you. You'll find little gotchas, and it will help you kind of map things out quite a bit better. So
yeah, can I just add in, Harris? So I want to tie it back to also why this is good for you, because from the poll earlier, about 50% of you talked about, your career might be held back by knowing what skills are important to develop. Going back to that maturity model, there are two skills on there that this set of experiences is particularly relevant to. One is helping out build the skills of making those deep customer connections. So in this case, you might be, understanding and being able to play back what your customers are going through. If you're actually doing these chair sides or watching them at their workplace do it, you now have stories of understanding exactly what they're doing, right? So you're building those personal relationships and building an understanding that you can then be an advocate back into your organization for what you're hearing. And the second piece to that is that you're getting good at communicating and telling stories. So it's quite different if you're looking at sort of survey results and saying, in general, customers are struggling with this, versus going back saying, I was with Harris at GUIDEcx in their DC office, and we were going through the process of setting up our solution, and he struggled with this particular step. Like, that's a really good story and credibility that people can then relate to a lot better when you use people's names and the company names and exactly what happened rather than generalization. And so that's a skill that gets increasingly important anywhere you are in your career.
Yep, fantastic advice. And I guess the piggyback off that, the other poll result was the lack of customer engagement during onboarding, right? So as you take those skills that Rod was just talking about, learning to become a better storyteller, understanding the specifics of what's happening with individuals and companies that you're working with, That will also help funnel back into you creating a better customer experience. It will help you understand how to better engage. You may see things that say, oh, well, this is why we're not getting engagement, because this step is confusing, or we're overwhelming the customer here, or it kind of feels like we went dark. I know there's a lot we're doing on our side, but yeah, walking that onboarding path in your customer's shoes is critical. So please go through that step. All right, next thing we want to talk about is establishing clear communication channels. Rod, talk to us a little bit about communication. What makes it so challenging, and when it works, why does it make such a big difference?
Yeah. So from working with clients and from being that services and customer onboarding executive, setting expectations very clearly, I found to be one of the keys to keeping customers engaged and keeping your projects moving along. So this communication can happen, one-on-one if you're having conversations or Zoom meetings with your customers, but it can also happen through automated mechanisms. Things like, when we were at Marketo and we went through this process with our customers to make sure that they had the information at every step they needed in that implementation process, that there might be one step of, right after the sale is closed, what is your communication to sort of congratulate them or welcome them in and set expectations about what's going to happen next. And then there might be a kickoff meeting and how to be prepared for that. And then what's going to happen after that. And then when you might have your first set of actions that you do. So thinking about what is the sequence. And for some people, they're going to want that like Notion, list or the getting started guide that they can do things all by themselves. And others are going to need to be reminded of what to do. So you can be thinking about how can you use GUIDEcx, how can you use other email automation systems to let people know what they need to do and when.
Yeah, excellent points. And this was one of the reasons why we started this company. We wanted to avoid that trap of kind of lots of people wondering who would move next, or whose court is the ball in right now. And sometimes that happens, especially when onboarding a team of customers, where you're waiting to find out if the form that you sent over has been filled out or is completed. And then somebody finds out that it was, and they respond, but they didn't respond to the right person, or they respond, but that person then got carried away with something else and wasn't able to communicate and get the next step rolling. So just as Rod talked about, I think putting together that sequence or series of steps and then finding ways to make it so that there are triggers that will automatically open. So when I complete this, then this fires off to the next person. And they're ready to go, and they've got the instructions. In our tool, you've got this dependency logic where if this task is marked done, then this one automatically gets sent out. Otherwise, the due date gets pushed out if this task is not done. And so making sure that people know exactly where they are in the process at all times helps, again, going back to that fear of the unknown and where do we stand and what's coming next. If you can try to get ahead of that with good communication, it makes a big difference for your customers.
Yeah. When I worked at Gainsight, we had our services team tied very closely to our customer education team. And as you're thinking through these automated communications, these getting started guides, your next email that gets sent out, you can have links in those that take you directly to a course or a short topic or a document that is relevant for where the customer is at that time. And so I'm a really big fan of leveraging, customer education and tying it to your onboarding experience so that customers who want that level of detail know exactly where to go, and they don't have to go and do searches for it. When I've worked with, I've had a number of clients in the past year, particularly in this economic environment where they're trying to figure out ways to take that live interaction out and have things be more automated, where we're working with them to build out their customer education program. What is their learning paths? Who are the personas they're talking to, and what sequence of content they need to either develop, or a lot of times it already exists. It's just all over the place, so you can sequence it. So that's where, as you're working in GUIDEcx, as you're putting together the sequence of communications, that those links can take you to resources that already exist that make it easy to take that next step and know what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, a misconception often when talking about automation or automating communication in particular is, well, how does that affect, our team members and what they do? Or should we automate communication for one segment of customers, but not another? Kind of almost a tech touch approach. And I want to emphasize here, along with what Rod said, find ways to use those automations to benefit everyone. Right? If you can automate communication in the right way, now your teams are able to up-level the types of engagements and communications that they're having with customers. And all of your customers then are benefiting from the automation, not just a select few.
It gives people choices also, because sometimes they're ready to take action when you actually have a meeting with them. But a lot of times you want them to be prepared and have done something so that when you do have your meeting with them, you can make it as productive as possible. When I was at Marketo and we were, working with our SMB and mid-market clients to try to onboard them in a relatively short, sort of 60-day window to get a lot done, we would set expectations about what they needed to do in the next, between this meeting and the next meeting. And that way we didn't have to go through the basics. We didn't have to explain what lead scoring was during our call. We could talk about how to apply lead scoring for their business. So that ability to set expectations, do it in an automated way, gives them the ability to do it when they have free time and not necessarily just when you have a meeting scheduled with them.
Yep. One more story on that. As you're talking about free time, it reminds me of a customer we were working with a couple of years ago here at GUIDEcx. A big part of their initial onboarding was document gathering from their customer. So they'd have their kickoff call, and then they'd need to get a handful of documents sent over and filled out properly from the customer, which may not be too dissimilar from some folks on this call. And again, like a lot of people responded, customer engagement was often a big problem for them. And so usually that process took about 2 to 3 weeks with back and forth, the customer sending the documents, them sending them back, needing to fix them up a little bit. They were able to templatize that approach in Guide. So they put together, hey, here's exactly the documents we need filled out. Here's what they should look like. Here are examples. Here's, to Rod's point, tutorial, from our education center and help documentation. And so typically that 2 to 3 week process, then they rolled out this new approach with this automated communication, invited this customer to the project in GUIDEcx. And on a Friday afternoon, they sent that live to one of their customers. And on Monday morning, they had all the documents they needed. So as Rod's talking about, giving your customers the space to work when they can. And, sometimes you may not expect, but in this case, that customer was able to not only have the right communication given at the right time, but they were motivated and excited to get everything done over the weekend. So this process that typically would have taken 2 to 3 weeks ended up taking, half a business day by putting some of these things in place. All right, let's jump forward here to tracking progress, identifying risk, making sure that customers know where they are, and forecasting risks. Rod, the question I want to start with here is, if we know there's risk, sometimes we're hesitant to share it. Sometimes we keep it close to the vest because we think, no, we're going to fix this internally, and we don't want to rock the boat with the customer. Why is it important that we change our mentality there and that we're a little more open with the risks that we see?
Yeah, this is important that, for teams to have an open, transparent set of communications between folks who might be the frontline onboarding consultants and their managers. I found that it works best if people are just transparent. We're struggling. The project is, delayed, or it's red, or however you're sort of defining, this is sort of at risk, and make sure that everyone knows so there can be attention on what you can do to solve problems. I always think that it's dangerous if managers have a process in place of like, okay, you're not doing well if your projects have the most red accounts, or counting those up, because that's not productive for anybody. Most of the time it can be client driven. You talked about engagement, people change jobs. It was, something out of the sales process wasn't clear. So there's tons of reasons that are not generally related to the implementation consultant dropped the ball on something. So I think it's really important to get visibility. And the second piece here is that a lot of the work that we do as onboarding leaders and onboarding consultants is that, we need to collaborate cross-functionally to help our customers get started. Sometimes they might be stuck with a support issue. Sometimes there might be a bug that needs to be addressed by our product team. Sometimes we need to work with the sales team to consistently set better expectations about what's going to happen. And so by creating that transparency, it also enables us to go back and tell stories, not just like this, this issue, but what are the trends that we can be improving systematically to address the risks so that they happen less and less frequently. So I'm a huge fan of, identifying them, have this visibility like you can see in GUIDEcx COO, and making sure that people understand the themes behind it, not just that one customer.
Yep. Critical part of forecasting the risk and tying it into the communication that we talked about earlier is making sure that the right people are getting that information. The founder of FedEx had this great quote from when he started the company, that one day the information about the package will be just as important as the package itself. And this really highlights this understanding of how valuable it is to know what's happening with the thing that you're expecting, right? So in our world of customer onboarding, these customers are expecting to be able to use and get value out of. And, something I like to say is every customer was born with hope, right? Every customer comes through hoping for something. They bought this to solve all their problems. And, that's why you do what you do, because you're passionate about your software and you know that it can help them. But then when there's risk, if that risk is hidden, it tends to just create more problems. So here at GUIDEcx COO, we talk about 3 people that need to be involved with every project. You should have the person who ultimately is responsible for the purchasing decision. So they may be literally the contract signer, or they may be ultimately the person that would give authority to have that contract signed. That person may not be involved in the day-to-day tasks of the project, but they need to be kept aware of what's happening. I recently signed a contract here for a software that we're using, and I've been, and obviously I'm a little biased, but I've been amazed at how little I am aware of what's happening with the onboarding from that team that I just signed the contract with. My team is working on it and I think doing a great job with their team, but I'm having to reach out and check in. Whereas if I were notified, weekly or monthly, depending on how long the overall cycle is, it'd be great to know where we stand. So that person needs to be involved. Then the application owner, that day-to-day kind of person who's responsible for the software, needs to be invited. And then at least one frontline person. And then you may have other people who are technical resources or other personas that you need involved, but at least those 3 people need to be there. And then when it comes to being open and honest about risk, I think, as far as customer engagement, Rod mentioned telling stories, there's a way to raise the red flag without causing too much alarm, right? You can call out, hey, we're not getting the customer engagement that we expected here. You wouldn't phrase it like that, but hey, we've seen that this task hasn't been completed quite yet. The last customer we worked with, and we've noticed a trend, customers we work with who get this done within a week are typically up and running within less than 30 days. And that's where we want you to be. Or this part of the process is what unlocks your team to have the ability to do X, Y, and Z in the product. And painting the picture of what's coming next can help to, again, provide a reinforcement of the value that you're offering while simultaneously giving an antidote to fear. And a final anecdote on this for me is, think about, all of us have probably ordered a package online, Rod, has every package you've ever ordered come on time from Amazon or FedEx?
Not always, but they tend to know, right?
They know, and they let you know, right? So you don't stop shopping with Amazon because you got a package that came on Thursday instead of Tuesday. I had an experience with them where, as I mentioned, I have 4 little boys. They ordered these biker gloves because why not, with the fingers cut off and everything. And one was blue and one was red. The blue ones came right away, and the red ones they were not coming. And I think it was 2 weeks later, Amazon sent us a note and said, hey, we've noticed you still haven't come. Do you just want to cancel and refund your purchase? They were proactive about forecasting that risk with us, and it helped us to know what to do. I had a flight that I took just a few weeks ago, and my connection was late. But I knew before we took off. And so I was, it was a bummer. Now I'm going to get home later than I expected. But I was able to look at the connecting airport, find a place where I wanted to get dinner, set up and do a little work for a little while. And so I was able to change my expectations. And often that's what a customer needs, is just to be aware of what's happening so they can manage expectations on their side.
Yeah. I wanted to add a point about
yeah.
why this is good for you. So in your career, there's 2 pieces to this transparency. One is creating transparency to your internal team members, your managers, your executive team, so they know where important projects stand. And the second is to have transparency with your customers so that you can help anticipate risks that may happen in the future. When I work with my clients, one of the things we focus on is trying to create repeatable results, not just good results, but good results that you understand what the levers are to achieving those results. And, throughout your career, you start to identify patterns that will allow you to raise your hand about issues further and further ahead. So in your onboarding process, you might hear that your key project driver at your customer has just left. That will be a signal to you that, hey, this project is going to take longer, or it's going to slow down for a while. And you can anticipate that. Or if they run into a particular type of issue, or if there's an expectation that is consistently not met coming out of sales, you'll know that this will be a problem and can start addressing that problem right there rather than letting it, kind of drag along. So this process of becoming predictable in what you're doing is really helpful. It's just a great career skill. It's important for credibility and transparency. And then you just also become good at pattern matching, which is another really great leadership and executive skill.
Cannot emphasize that enough. Thanks for sharing that, Rod, because that a business, if you personify the business wants to know what it can expect. So the better you can get at forecasting risks and understanding and pattern matching, like Rod talked about, the much more helpful it is to the business overall. So another key skill for career development that will also benefit your customers. Let's talk about our last piece here around measuring efficiency. One thing that I like to share is that we have so much data available to us now, but I worry sometimes that data can be like a rocking chair where it gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere. And so as we think about measuring efficiency, Rod, what have you seen as the difference maker between having data just for data's sake and data that actually really drives a change that's ultimately good for your customer and can help you build your career?
Yeah. Well, it reflects back on this point I just made about predictability and being able to understand where your customers are and are there different segments. Certain customers might naturally be somebody that takes 30 days to do their onboarding, and maybe that naturally comes in through your SMB business or a different group that might have different expectations around enterprise. But more often there's particular situations that happen during the project that might make it shorter or make it longer. Like you find somebody that has used your solution before and is more of an expert in it, or someone who just joined and has no idea and wasn't involved in the sales process and is learning along the way. So you're trying to better understand like what the right level of interaction and efficiency is for the particular customers that you're working on. And another skill to develop here is around understanding sort of your cost of delivery, which is related to sometimes how much time you spend or invest with a customer, or how many customers you or your team members may be able to work with concurrently. And so you can work with your finance leader, your finance business partner to understand that cost. And companies, you know, unfortunately these days, you're always trying to find ways to just continuously improve it, or at least make sure that the cost of delivery makes sense for the revenue that that customer is bringing in.
Yeah. I think that there are a couple of critical things here to tie together with not only improving the customer engagement, but also with knowing what skill sets to develop. So from those poll questions that were answered earlier, this is an incredible skill to have, to be able to. John Dewar wrote that great book, Measure What Matters. I'd suggest reading that if anyone hasn't. But being able to understand how to look at different parts of your process and your business. And if you are on the front lines onboarding customers every day, you can do this. If you're managing a team, you can. If you're leading multiple teams, you can. But it is very hard to improve something that you don't measure. Very, very hard. In fact, I'd say you're lucky. You're getting lucky if you're making improvements on something that you're not measuring. But if you measure, if you take the time to put down measurements and review those measurements and forecast them and trend them, you'll start to make a big impact for your customers and improving their experience. As you go through the experience yourself and maybe start to learn why this part of the process takes as long as it does. But then also the other side of that coin is the way it improves the business, the way it helps you understand your cost of delivery. This is, I think, a really big one that is easy to shy away from and kind of do later, but really helps to make an impact. And some things that you can think about is changing out, and Rod talked about this, looking at maybe different segments. Maybe a customer who came in through a certain lead channel is going to take a different amount of time or spend more time in one section versus another. So look at things like milestones of your process, look at different products, different customer types, different industries. Make sure that, you understand exactly where you're putting your resources, and it is going to help drive a big change in terms of the experience that your customers have.
Yeah. And this relates to a skill that you can be developing around understanding what's important to your organization at different periods, different stages of its evolution. And this relates to, ask them, go talk to your CFO, or go talk to your manager, or talk to your finance business partner and understand what they need from your organization this quarter and maybe a couple quarters out. You might be in a business where the implementation currently is free, and over the next, 3 to 6 months, you need to start thinking about charging fees for it as your company grows. Or maybe you get to a place where you need to differentiate your experience between your SMB and your enterprise clients because you can't scale well enough, or maybe they need to improve profitability of an organization because you're getting ready for a funding round. And there definitely are benchmarks and metrics that investors look at to see how your business is performing to other companies that are like you. So have that conversation, ask what's important, because it may not, if this is the first time you're going through this, may not be something that you're as aware of. And they may have a particular need from a set of outcomes from your organization.
Yeah. Rod, a couple of great questions came in as we were talking there. Folks looking for examples of ways to measure and what to measure, I think. What's top of mind for you there? What's the best way to get measurement going?
So I think in customer onboarding, there can be one around like time to first value. So when I was working at Marketo, there might be like time to end of project, which is another metric. So there's time to first value and time to project close, but those are different. One of our goals would be to help a customer get their contacts into Marketo, set up their first email campaign or their web form, so that they saw like, hey, I can actually do something. I feel like if I keep investing time, I'm going to be able to do more. I'm going to be able to send out nurtures. I'm going to be able to send out, get my webinars up and running more quickly. But whatever it was, they started to see some value. So that's one that you can measure. Another you can measure is time to project closure. Another is depending on whether you have fee-based services, is like bookings that you're generating from the organization. A lot of companies do care about sort of profitability. Is your revenue coming in from your customer onboarding and services able to at least pay for the team? Doesn't need to be a profit driver at the company in any way, but the closer it looks to break even, the happier your finance leaders are going to be. And that's not appropriate for super small companies, but as the company matures, gets bigger, it's definitely something that your finance team is looking at. So I would focus on a couple of those.
Yeah, I think those are excellent. And I'd only, I think, add an order of operations to them. I think if you are out there and you're not measuring anything right now, start with what Rod talked about with just the overall project time. It tends to be the easiest thing to measure. How long does it take us from the kickoff call to the wrap-up call or the handoff call, right? Start measuring that. Another thing Rod talked about was the aha moment. So when Rod says time to first value, he's referring to this moment that every customer has where it's their first, like, their hope has been realized. It's kind of fanning the flame of that hope where they see, oh, wow, yeah, this was cool. This really worked. In our product, for example, if you're a customer of ours and we're onboarding you, because we deliver an onboarding software, we want to help you set up your templates and build out your project plans. We want to help you learn how to run an effective project. And number one thing on our mind is teaching you how to engage your customers really well. But time to first value for us is the first time you see your customer engage in a project you built. So that doesn't mean you're done with onboarding with us, but it means that you've gotten a taste, just like Rod talked about, of, wow, this worked. That's exciting. I'm getting something out of this. So we're measuring both of those quite a bit. And then I would say you can start measuring those things by different dimensions. So start to measure those items by team member on your team, who's going the fastest, who's taking the longest. Start measure customer satisfaction. If you're not yet, there could be a difference. It's a good counterbalance to speed. Speed is not always the answer. And so, yeah, you want to make sure you're balancing satisfaction along with speed. And if you can measure customer satisfaction by team member, if you can start again by customer type, by industry that you serve, these will help make a really big difference.
Yeah. I wanted to address a sorry, guys.
Please. Yeah.
I just wanted to
I was
address
just going to say we've got a few minutes left, so let's jump into questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Vincenzo had asked about how to prioritize workload in clients. And, it's always tough for a manager to react to, my team feels really busy and they feel overworked, because it's hard to quantify that. So one of the ways that onboarding leaders do that is by measuring utilization, which is, how much time are you working with clients on client-facing work as a percentage of your sort of total availability. So often it's a 40-hour work week, how many hours are working with customers. And there are actually some pretty good metrics around, 65 to 75% of time should be, utilized. And if you have fee-based revenue, a very high percentage of that should be, it's called billable utilization. That requires time tracking. Sometimes that's not in place for all organizations, but that's one of the really good ways that you can start to measure and benchmark yourself against other similar types of organizations.
Yeah, great advice there, Rod. We've talked about Rod's book a good amount here. It's been a huge help to me, tons of really practical examples. So we've had this slide up for a minute. Please make sure that you check it out.
Yeah, thanks for the time. I have a lot of resources and templates for both leaders as well as frontline folks at rodcherkas.com. that you can download. Follow me on LinkedIn. And if you think that you or one of your managers might be interested in talking with me about your customer onboarding strategy, improvements that you need to make, developing out a partner channel potentially, there's lots of experiences that I've provided to clients that I may be able to support you and your organization with. So feel free to reach out to me at any of those channels.
Rod, Claire asked a question that I think would be great for us to tackle here. What techniques can you offer for when the honeymoon phase is spoiled by customer disappointment because the product expectations from the sales process are misaligned with the reality of the product? I don't think Claire is the only one facing that. So what thoughts come to your mind right off the bat there?
Yeah, well, I think one of them is if this does become a consistent trend, that just like your own enablement and training may not be fantastic. A lot of companies don't have awesome sales enablement processes. They have new reps. And so you can work with your leadership team to identify the common trends and then take opportunities, your managers, to get in front of the sales team at their all hands or at their leadership team staff meetings and share some of the trends, things that would make your life better and that would make your customers' life better. And also offer, there are things that your team needs to do to be flexible with them. So I think it's shared communication and, getting visibility with the leaders, that it can't just be transactional. You've got to come in and help identify where they can, where you can help in general.
Yeah. We've had a lot of good questions come in. I know we don't have time to answer every one of them, but as Rod and I mentioned, we're available to meet outside of just this digital interaction as well. We're both going to be at Pulse in May. Our founder here at GUIDEcx is speaking there, so that'd be great to see. Rod and I would love to connect with you in person there as well. And then there's we'd like to thank the Alliance and the Customer Success Collective who helped put on this webinar today. They have an event coming up in Las Vegas. If you're going to be there, we'd love to meet with you as well and continue talking about some of these things. I think, just in summary, both for your career and for your customers, if you are going through the process yourself that you're offering, it's going to help make a big difference. If you're measuring every different component of what you're doing, and if you're forecasting that those expectations both internally and externally with the customers, and if you're creating ways to automate communication and build out processes that scale, these are going to be 4 points that will be a huge benefit, not only the experience you offer your customers, but for your career. And whether you're in a really great economic time like we were in a year or two ago, or a challenging one like now, figuring those things out will help move you forward. So thanks everyone for joining. Rod, it's always great talking to you. Thanks for being here with us. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Great.
Yeah, thank you both so much. That was such an insightful session. So really, really appreciate that. And it's been great to connect with you both. So I know we've had loads of questions come in. To finish it off, should we do one more question and then leave it there?
Absolutely. I have plenty more time, so I'll stick around here.
Yeah, let's go for it. Feel free to pick one.
Let's see. Rod, how about this one? Tips to gain insight into and forecast risk for customer projects that have been outsourced. So this is common in the onboarding space. So I've sold a product and I am getting it implemented, but my company's not doing the implementation. We work with a partner and they are doing the implementation. How do you oversee that? How do you forecast risks around it? Thoughts, Rod?
So when I was at Gainsight, we had many of our projects were done by our internal teams, and then we had a small number of partners that we worked with closely to either subcontract or outsource implementations. And we had a person who part of their job was to be sort of a partner portfolio manager. And she would be setting up meetings, I think it was every other week, with the partner to do a review of the implementation projects that they were working on. And the important piece here is it can't just be one way. It can't be we don't trust you, so that we need to see how you're doing. It needed to be mutually beneficial. So we would get visibility to the projects that they're working on, but it would also be a place where they could bring issues to us to help get them addressed. If they needed to get information from a product team, or if one of their clients had a support issue that wasn't being followed up upon, or the consultant at the partner didn't know how to do something, we could get them resources to help them learn about some new capability. So it needed to be mutual, and that way everybody shows up, and it's it's kind of valuable as an investment of time both ways. So having that transparency is important, and I totally recognize that that can be a challenge.
Yeah, in that book that we talked about earlier, Measure What Matters, by John Dewar, he's got this great quote that transparency seeds collaboration. Mm-hmm. And to what Rod's talking about there, it's critical that there is transparency there with your third party. In Guide, you could have visibility into the projects that your partners are running. And you can then use what Rod just talked about there to kind of face that situation with collaboration in mind rather than contention. And so that more you're trying to enable them and help them and identify, hey, we're seeing what you're seeing here. It's not a secret that we're behind schedule on this project. What can we do? Here's some ideas we have. What do you think that you need in order to get there? And in line with that, and sorry, Beth, I know you said one more, but I see Tiana is still logged in here with many others. And Tiana asked a question that's honestly a little bit heartbreaking. So we got to answer this, Rod, which is, what advice do you have for someone who is on a team that does not value being transparent with their customers? And this, I think, speaks to change management. One of the reasons I wanted to highlight this is, Tiana, you're definitely not alone here in that all of us, and as we think about not only improving the experience for our customers, but also building our careers, you're going to have to change minds. You're going to have to find ways. Rod talked about being an effective storyteller, building bridges with cross-functional departments, how to change the minds of an organization or a team that doesn't necessarily value being transparent with customers. Rod, what are your thoughts?
I would say to also understand what the root cause of it is, because this could be an opportunity that process just hasn't been put in place. And your company is in a situation where, hey, over the next period of time, we're going to put in the operating procedure to do certain things. It could be to create this transparency or to create reports with customers, which could be very different than like just culturally we're trying to hide and be secretive and, try to protect our customers from knowing something that we don't want them to know. I'm going to guess that it's more of the former, where they're just not in place. This might be a really good opportunity for you to be transparent with your customers. Identify the process that you're using to do that, right? How are you communicating with them? What information are you sharing? What outcomes you're getting when you are transparent? And then share that back with your team so that it becomes a best practice that others on the team adopt or become the standard practice for how you operate.
I want to, reinforce what Rod said there about showing, I think often things like this, they're best shown rather than begged for. So put in place some practices yourself that you believe are going to make a difference with your customers. Be transparent where you can, and then share those successes. And then it's less about kind of your idea versus somebody else's idea, and more about the customer experience and the result of what the customer saw. And I think if you can share those wins from the customer standpoint, it should help to change minds.
Well, guys, some brilliant advice to leave us there with. So thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your time. So thank you, Rod. Thank you, Harris, and hope to see you both again very soon. Thanks everyone for joining as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.